Welcome back to World Affairs in Context, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. In a move that is very much redefining what counts as defense in modern geopolitics, NATO countries are quietly reshaping their military spending commitments, and at the very heart of this shift is Ukraine. Now European taxpayers, as their economies are declining, will be on the hook to continue funding the proxy war against Russia. Billions of euros in aid, military gear, and industrial support for Kyiv may soon be counted toward NATO's proposed new defense spending target of 5% of their GDP. As you understand, this change is more than an accounting tweak. It signals a fundamental realignment in how the West approaches its desire for more bloodshed at the expense of Ukrainian and Russian lives. According to the EU officials, the war must go on.
You know that when it comes to Ukraine, in Washington, there was a clear commitment by all 32 allies that there is an irreversible path for Ukraine to come into NATO. Not with an end date, not understanding this as part of a peace settlement, but clearly as a longer-term commitment by all 32 allies, and we are building that bridge as we speak, with the command in Wiesbaden, with in Poland, JTEC, which is capturing all the lessons, and of course all the other cooperation ongoing between NATO countries and Ukraine. Thank you so much.
So let's break it down. Currently, NATO requires its members to spend at least 2% of their individual GDP on defense. And this is a target that only a handful of countries have consistently met, which is why US President Trump, as you may know very well, is so, let's say, displeased with the EU. And this is one of many reasons, of course. But with rising tensions across Europe and Europe's and Zelensky's lack of desire to end the war in Ukraine, and add to that the growing strategic uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific following Hexa's latest speech, NATO is preparing to raise that target to 5%. So under this new plan, 3.5% would go toward traditional military spending, such as hardware, troop salaries, and training, but an additional 1.5% will be allocated to broader, quote, defense-related expenses. Now, arguably, this has very little to do with true defense needs, but rather offense activities and hybrid warfare tactics deployed in Eastern Europe, including Russia's territory, as recent events evidence. And here's where Ukraine enters the picture. NATO officials, speaking anonymously, of course, so there's no direct report with the names of these officials. However, NATO officials have confirmed that financial support for Ukraine's military would count toward this broader 1.5% category. So NATO appears to have found a loophole to protract the conflict by raising the funds to channel to this conflict. That includes new purchases of military gear for Ukraine, investments in Ukrainian arms manufacturers, and other direct contributions, as long as it is fresh money, says NATO. What won't count? While gifts from existing arsenals are not going to count, such as weapons and equipment that NATO countries already had and simply donated to Ukraine, those were counted as defense spending when they were originally purchased. So to avoid double counting, NATO says only new expenditures matter now. Non-military aid also doesn't make the cut. That includes humanitarian support, that includes infrastructure repair, or economic assistance. As you might know very well by now, Ukraine is unable to pay its debts and is unable to finance government operations without external funding, without Western funding. In financial and in political terms, arguably, Ukraine is effectively inching closer and closer to that status of a failed state. Last year alone, NATO allies spent over 50 billion euros in military support to Ukraine. That number far exceeded their original target of $40 billion. This includes cutting-edge systems like US-made fighter jets and Patriot missile batteries. How does NATO and the EU sell this increase in funding of their proxy war against Russia to their population? I think that is a very important question. How does the European population react to this? What do they hear about this? Well, NATO appears to be set on pushing the tired narrative that Kyiv's ability to defend itself directly affects NATO's security. And I'm sure there are many people who are still buying this. This European news site, very much a propaganda channel, says that there is a growing support for a strategy known as the Danish model. So instead of donating weapons from their own stockpiles, from their own arsenals, countries are now buying gear directly from Ukrainian manufacturers for Ukrainian forces. NATO believes that this model offers two strategic benefits, two advantages. First, it builds up Ukraine's defense economy, which is quite bizarre, in my opinion, given that, of course, there are major logistical resources needed and human resources that are required for anything meaningful and efficient to be created on the Ukrainian territory. So I'm not quite sure what kind of Ukrainian infrastructure they're actually investing in. And second, NATO appears to want to shift toward this model, this Danish model as they refer to it, to preserve NATO countries' own military readiness by avoiding stockpile depletion, as was the case when they sent everything they had to Ukraine during the first several years of the conflict. Now, as of today, 32 member countries are actually engaged in these quite shocking negotiations over the final terms of this 5% spending framework. As their own economies decline, as their own economies have been declining for years, I should clarify, they are laser focused on ramping up military spending instead of addressing their own domestic economic structural issues. It is quite unbelievable, actually. Now, with that being said, NATO members appear to want to make a decision soon. Of course, meeting Trump's expectations amid the growing trade tensions between the EU and the US is also part of the issue. Without a doubt, Trump uses tariffs on the EU as leverage as well. And a decision is expected when NATO leaders actually meet in The Hague on June the 24th and June the 25th later this month. But even if the general framework is agreed upon, the finer details may not be finalized until later this year. Without a doubt, the EU is going to want Trump to be part of the broader funding effort, despite the fact that he is in favor of ending the conflict, and he said this many, many times. But there are individuals in his own administration who are extremely, who are set on continuing the war. They are Russia hawks, such as Keith Kellogg, for example, who advocates for using Ukrainians to inflict more harm on Russia, and he sees no moral issue associated with that.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, I believe if you can defeat a strategic adversary not using any U.S. troops, you're at the acme of professionalism, because letting the Ukrainians defeat that, it takes a strategic adversary off the table, and then we can focus where we should be focusing against our primary adversary, which is China at this time. The concern I've got is I don't think we need to put American troops there. And if we fail in this, we may have to fight another European war. It'll be the third time. And I don't think we should do that or need to do that as well.
And of course, we've got Lindsey Graham, who's never seen a war that he didn't love. Now, according to internal NATO data, European countries delivered around 60% of military aid to Ukraine last year, with the remaining 40% coming from the United States. By committing to pay for Ukraine's military needs, NATO members effectively signal to the entire world that they are unwilling to support peace-building efforts to bring the conflict to an end. After the terrorist attack on 2 trains in Russia, days before the second round of peace talks in Istanbul, and of course, Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, NATO is inching closer and closer to a direct confrontation with Russia, and it certainly lays its intentions out in the open for anyone to see. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this quick video was interesting. Please remember to show your support. It does go a long way. Like, subscribe, and share. Turn on notifications by ringing the bell. And for more content, make sure that you are a subscriber at worldaffairsandcontext.com. It is my Substack. I would love to see all of you there. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye for now.